This week on the Eldritch Lorecast. And then what are we even doing here?
What are we doing here?
What are we doing here, Dael? The 2024 core books are on their way.
Let's just speak in veiled terms.
Just don't mess that up. Don't make the game so it's unplayable. That was all I'm asking.
Will I be watching when it's happening? At 7 a.m., not a chance.
The D&D Beyond version of Vecna, Eve of Ruin has more art than the book does.
Fundamentally changed premise of the Furby.
This is the news that we need.
Here's Chris Cox. He just lost $7 billion or something like that.
A media production company that you bought for $100 gazillion and sold for $1.250.
D&D's had its fair share of MMOs that dwindle as they're, put on life support.
I don't mean to be ragging on Chris Cox, but
AI smells so much better than my players.
All that and more
right now. All right, folks. Benjamin Burns is otherwise occupied.
He's all been burned out.
He's all burned out. That's a good line.
It is.
Gotta save that for the real.
Yeah, save that for the show. Okay, here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. I am not Ben Byrne. I am Shawn Merwin, here as always with James Hake and Dael Kingsmill. We are the #1 podcast in all the realms. We are so #1 that we may actually be 1,111. That's how #1 we are.
That's pretty #1.
The 2024 core books are on their way. What is one of the 2 or 3 biggest things that you want from those core books when they come out?
I want a Dungeon Master's Guide that I refer to somewhat regularly. And I'm trying to check my bias here because I was a lot newer to the game when I was playing 3rd edition. But when I was in 3rd edition, there were all sorts of things in the DMG that I went to all the time. They had trap rules that were really robust. Actually, let me amend my answer. I want a DMG that has really robust traps in it. Let's just put a stake in the ground right there. 5e's traps, I appreciate the effort. They are not useful to me in any way. So let's get 5 pages of traps that I can use every single session if I wanted to in that game.
So it's the Trap Master's Guide is what you're looking for.
The Trap Master's Guide. And you know what? That's, one might say that's even half of what a dungeon is.
If your dungeon isn't at least 50% traps, you're doing it wrong.
You can't have a death trap dungeon without the death and the traps.
We could call that book the Trap Master and Puzzle Master's Guide. A dungeon is many things. And if we don't have all the stuff that's in the dungeon within the Dungeon Master's Guide, then what are we even doing here?
What are we doing here?
What are we doing here, Dael?
When you think about it, it is pretty wild that there isn't just like a full chapter of the DMG that is just example puzzles and riddles to use. I know we live in an internet age, but I also would just gain utility from that because I love riddles and I want to puzzle myself with riddles at any opportunity. Just give me lots of riddles. My answer is much more boring than that and much less useful. I just want a ranger class that is good, that serves the ranger fantasy, just does it simple, good. That's what I want.
All I want is it's the Hippocratic Oath, right? It's do no harm. It's you've got a great game, you've got fans, you've got people that love playing it. Just don't mess that up. Don't make the game so it's unplayable. That was all I'm asking.
I always knew that my job was really similar to my doctor friend.
We do the same thing, really. We're saving lives.
We do the same thing, basically.
Yeah, healing the sick and saving lives. So I'm going to flip the question around then and say, what are the biggest thing or things that you don't want from the 2024 core books?
I don't want complexity for complexity's sake. I came to this while I was doing a deep dive of the Daggerheart playtest rules. They're 1.4.1.2. They're newest playtest rules. And I was going through a lot of sort of big picture game design thoughts while I was going through it because like we talked about a week or two ago, that game has a 2-hit roll and a damage roll. And, this extra step for damage mitigation, right? It's more complex than D&D systems, but I found that I liked the purpose of that added complexity, right? It's more complicated, but it makes me have more fun while I'm doing it, potentially. And so we're seeing things like weapon mastery and other, bits of design showing up in the new 2024 rules, right? The player's handbook is all this weapon mastery stuff, as we've seen through all these unearthed arcanas. I have not playtested those rules very significantly, or at least, I'm playing a druid in my 2024 Unearthed Arcana playtest game. And I just sort of pray that those rules make gameplay more fun. It's not just another thing because we said we wanted more stuff.
Yeah, I really just don't want bookkeeping feels like the wrong word. Homework. I don't want there to be too much homework. When you're sitting down to make a character for a one shot, I don't want that feeling of like, oh no, I have to choose spells. Oh no, I have to go through and choose my skill proficiencies. I want to cut through that a little bit. Let's just get to the meat, get to the fun straight away. That's what I'm hoping for.
All right, so you both took my answers. I don't want a more complicated game, and I don't want a game that's harder for new players and game masters to pick up and run. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We saw in the playtest packets that they were adding certain bits, such as weapon mastery, and assuming that they do make it to the final book, it is really just one more thing for new players to, I just want to play a fighter. I just want to play a fighter. Okay, here's a fighter. And, don't forget you can do this, and don't forget you can do that. And, you use a mace. So don't forget that you can knock back an opponent 5 feet or knock them prone. My worry, like James says, is all that sound and fury signifying so little in the outcome of the stories that come out of this game. And who are we serving as we move further and further into role-playing game zeitgeist that people seem to be coming to the game? Is it that 5-foot push because you're using this bludgeoning weapon? Or is it the grand stories that you can tell? I don't know. Part of me is like, but the game is the game. That needs to be fun. It needs to draw players. But part of me is just like, instead of teaching people how to play the game, let's teach people how to tell stories. And let's teach people what we love about sharing narratives with each other, because that's where a lot of games fall down. You get so many DMs saying, I started and my game was so fun, and then everyone just sort of tailed off. What happened? That's the sort of thing that is hard to teach. But if you could teach game masters that part, that storytelling and engagement part, it would be so nice.
This is not the point you were trying to make, Shawn, but when you mentioned pushing 5 feet, every now and then I have this thought when I read, a feat or a feature or something that's like, and you can push the creature up to 5 feet. I always think, would this feature be better if it were 30 feet, right? Like if it were like in Dragon Ball where, a guy gets punched, you go, 50 feet away. That's big and it's splashing. It's super heroic and it kind of fits like tier 3, maybe even tier 2 D&D play. It's because it's the same sort of design ethos that took away a bunch of situational +1s from 5e, right? And replaced it with a more impactful mechanic. Advantage, disadvantage. And I go back and forth all the time. Would it make those little pushes more useful? It would definitely make it more useful, make it more powerful. But would it make it feel better? Would I be more likely to take those things from a narrative point of view, even if I was still playing it on theater of the mind? If you've got a GM that is very narrative first, pushing 5 feet when you're kind of in the region of a cliff that you can push someone off of is effectively identical to a push of 30 feet.
DM Rawlings is in chat saying pretty much what I was thinking, which is that 5 feet is really far if you think about it physically, practically. But on the battle board, it's only 1 square. So it doesn't feel like it is a weird space we inhabit where we're like, we know that 1 square, 1 inch is 5 feet, but it doesn't feel like 5 feet. When your mini is filling up that entire square is meant to represent you doing this, then it's kind of, I don't know, everything gets warped a little bit. Yeah. Everything gets a little strange. And that 5 feet, even 10 feet becomes so situational that it's like, in real life, if you can shove someone 10 feet, then that feels like a huge deal. But unless you are on, I don't know, the Bridge of Khazad-dûm in game, it's not going to necessarily come up that much.
Yeah.
You ever overlaid a 5-foot grid over a real life castle's floor plan?
Right.
Oh no. Unusable.
There are videos out there where it shows people like fighting from 5 feet away or in those grids. And it's so ridiculous looking, like that you have to run up and then run back to actually do anything. But what the 5-foot push does is it forces game masters to say, okay, if this is going to matter, then I need to put things around that will then do important things. Oh, you can push them 5 feet. I need to put a cliff. I need to put a fireplace. I need to put something. And that's just one more piece of cognitive work that a game master needs to do. Now, if I remember correctly, MCDM's game, they have a lot of that pushing, but there's damage at the end of it. At first I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's good. That makes it a little more impactful because in most of these games, hit points is what's important to the game. So you have to take away hit points as well as push. And then part of me was like, still, is that enough? Is the pushing and the knocking and the hitting and the pinballing still worth narratively the weight that the game gives it? And there's no right answer. It's just what you prefer. I think of the children. I think of the children and what they love, and it's not pushing 5 feet.
Standing there with their gruel balls, please.
Yes, please. Man, no,
May
but you
I
can
have
push 5 feet
more?
Well, all of this leads to our first little bit of news today, which is the Player's Handbook preview. We're recording on Monday. Starting on Tuesday and lasting the entire week, Wizards of the Coast is going to be revealing / has revealed parts of the Player's Handbook. There is a chart that we are going to go by here that you can see by going to YouTube or various sites. And they say that on Tuesday, they're going to give us a Player's Handbook, everything you need to know, a weapon mastery, apparently it is in there, and character origins talks. On Wednesday, they're going to look at the fighter. On Thursday, they're going to look at the paladin. And on Friday, they're going to look at the barbarian. And all of those, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it's 9 a.m. Pacific time. And on Tuesday, it starts at 7 a.m. Pacific daylight time. And that's at youtube.com/DnD Wizards. Well, the first thing I noticed, Dael, is they don't have the ranger in there. I think they're frightened.
They don't. They're afraid of me.
Are you going to be watching this with bated breath?
Let's just speak in veiled terms. I may have seen some things, and some things that might be revealed this week, I'm excited for people to see.
Your vagueness is well taken.
Dael Kingsmill, vague but evocatively excited about D&D 5.5. Print the headline.
What I'm saying is, I don't need to watch with bated breath, but I'm going to be watching everyone else.
Will I be watching? Shawn, I already forgot when it's happening. At 7 a.m., not a chance. I will be cozy in bed, wrapped up in my blankets, asleep. But I will probably watch the VOD as soon as I'm up. Yeah, I want to know what's happening. I'm gonna buy those new books, and maybe I'm jumping the gun on a future question, but and I'll start playing with the new rules when they come out. I mean, I want to play the latest version of D&D. I'm probably always going to be playing the latest version of D&D unless I have a good reason to play otherwise. This update to 5e seems close enough to the current 5e that we have that I really see no reason to go back and play 2014 5e in the way that I would go back and play 4th edition or AD&D.
Are you currently in a regular 5e game?
Yes, I'm running one. I'm actually converting the Dragon Heist game that I'm running right now to Daggerheart because I want to playtest that game. And I'm playing in a game that James Wyatt's daughter is running using the Unearthed Arcanas.
I was running a current 5e game that has stagnated, and I recognize that is largely my own fault with being busy with life and other things. You know, things other than life. But it still feels as though I am currently running a 5e game, even though it has been literal months. I'm definitely going to be doing that pick and choose situation where I go, I like this particular class in 5.2 or whatever you want to call it. And so that's if you want to play X class, play this version. If you want to play this class, we'll be running with this version. Because I already kind of do that. I'm so homebrew heavy that I tend to like hand play as my own folder of printed out versions of rewritten classes anyway. So it's not like any skin off my nose to just kind of fit in the stuff that I want from the old edition and the stuff that I want from the new edition, and kind of just make players choose between those. That works for me. That's how I roll, as the kids might say.
As the kids said in 1990.
As the kids said in 1992, the year before my birth. But I fully grasp that it's like, for a lot of people, this kind of errata more than new edition must be really frustrating, because it is a weird thing to be like, here you go, it's not that different. It's different enough that it might cause you problems, but it's not so different that you'll want to draw a huge distinction between the two of them in 10 years' time.
Yeah, I'm in the strange position where I'm running a 5e game, but it's Citadel the Unseen Sun. And so we're using a lot of Ghostfire material, subclasses, transformations, and so on. So it was sort of already a bastardized version of 5e, not saying that Ghostfire are a bunch of bastards or anything, but
we are, though.
But we are. And so then I didn't know what I was going to run after that. Vecna, the new Vecna book came out, and it almost fits perfectly from going from Citadel the Unseen Sun to jump right into that, a world-spanning adventure. But then I was like, but that's going to be a 2014 book. But then if I want to move all this Ghostfire stuff to 2024, I'll have to have them redo their characters plus redo the Ghostfire stuff. Now, I'm always up for a good redesign, as you know. So it's sort of, I'm in this limbo of what do I want to do, and I'll probably just crawl into my desk and cry.
A sensible course of action.
This is strange because I'm literally scooping myself here.
He's getting scooped.
On Mastering Dungeons, we have an absolutely wonderful Discord community. The lore cats are great, don't get me wrong. But the folks at Mastering Dungeons, they're like feeding us news and feeding us takes, and it's great. And they put together something that I haven't seen out there talked about. And I'm surprised because usually people are all over this. And if there's anything, even the slightest bit to complain about, it will be out there. But what they found was, speaking of Vecna, Eve of Ruin, the material in D&D Beyond does not match the material in the published book.
Oh.
Not words right now that anyone has seen, but the art. The D&D Beyond version of Vecna, Eve of Ruin has more art than the book does. There is a long list of mostly NPC art that is in D&D Beyond that is not in the book. And so we were like, we being Teos and I were like, could this possibly be true? And I had done the digital bundle, so I had the digital. I went to my book and I'm like, sure enough. Our Discord pointed out that all of this art was not in the book that was on D&D Beyond, which prompted Teos to write to Wizards of the Coast, to their customer support, to say, is this known? Was this known beforehand? Did you plan to let people know that the D&D Beyond version might have more art than the regular version? For me, it's not a huge deal. For me, if the words were different, I would be on the warpath. But for people that really dig the art and buy it mostly for art, this is something that's sort of important to know. Good to know. What do y'all think about that? Because we're getting into a world now where the digital is going to be different than print.
It is interesting because it's like simultaneously I understand why the art might vanish from a print version. You know, if you're trying to stick to sort of a page count, I can see how that would happen. But at the same time, it does feel like the print books are a more visual medium. As in, if you're buying the print books, you're buying it because it is a beautiful item, more likely than you're buying it because of practicality. So it is kind of an interesting choice. And at first I was like, oh, maybe they just filled out the digital version with, you know, kind of non-specific artwork that they just had in the archives, just chuck it in there to keep things visually interesting as you're scrolling through. But if it's NPC art, that feels kind of specific and bespoke.
From what I know about book production, it's that there's kind of two ways to put a book together. Wizards does it one way, and it caught me off guard when I started working with Ghostfire because they do it another way. It's all about the order in which the graphic design and the art, like commissioning, happens, right? In some projects, the text of the book is locked, it's put into a graphic design format, and then you kind of find where there are holes in the text, right? Because you want to align text. So, new information starts pages whenever you can and stuff like that. And then however large those holes are, you're like, okay, well, this is exactly as much art as we need. We'll commission it to fill these holes. And that has the advantage of being highly cost effective, but it comes with the drawback of making the time from just production time longer. The other way is to estimate, right? We want the book to be 320 pages long. That comes out to an estimate of this many thousand words and this many, quarter, half, and full page pieces of art. And then when you start puzzling it all together, every now and then you will find that there's too much of one thing. And so you have to excise it. Typically, when you're doing this process, it's text that gets excised because it's much less expensive to throw away a little bit of text than it is to throw away a little bit of art. But sometimes the art does get excised, either because it's not quite what they wanted and it's good to, they didn't really need it in there anyway. And so it goes into like this slush pile, this art graveyard that can be pulled on whenever there's a project that all of a sudden comes up short on art, and hey, maybe we have something that works back in the graveyard. Let's just bring it back in.
Necromancy.
A little bit of art necromancy, but not in that horrible abomination to life AI sort of way. This is ethical art necromancy. And of course, in a situation like this, the artist gets paid full price anyway. That's a cost that the publisher eats. But I've never seen it done this way, where art that has sort of been slushed winds up making its way into a different edition, right? The digital edition. And it makes me wonder, well, will this be a trend going forward? It doesn't seem to bother me. NPC art is very hard to pull out of an art graveyard because it's very specific. So it makes total sense that it's NPC art getting reused this way. The difference of art in editions being different does not bother me much at all. But what does give me pause is the fact that no one told us about this, right? There's no patch notes. There's nothing indicating, hey, this version differs in this way from the other version, because eventually one can imagine the text may change. And if text changes between versions, yeah. Well, and we've seen it already, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it with errata. You can easily change the text on D&D Beyond and fix things. The book, it's harder since it's in your home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They have to commission Santa's elves, and it's a whole thing. They come in the dead of night.
Yeah. Hasbro North Pole.
The North Pole division.
Yes.
Yeah. And, when Jeremy Crawford was doing Sage Advice all the time, we would see those errata updates released as PDFs saying, hey, this got changed to this. If you want to print out this page and stick it in, paste it into the back of your player's handbook, you can do that. I don't think I've seen a Sage Advice like that in a long time. Years. Has it happened and I've just missed it? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think that was replaced with, a new edition. A newish edition. There's your Sage Advice right there.
Mm-hmm.
The next bit of news I'm very excited to get James and Dael talking about. Hasbro CEO and former president and CEO of Wizards of the Coast, Chris Cox, did an interview with Fortune magazine. And I watched these with glee because I love corporate speak and how absolutely inane and counter reality it is. But it also teaches us a little about what the executives think investors want to hear versus what executives think players and fans want to hear. So I want to ask the questions that Fortune magazine asked Chris Cox, and I want to ask both of you.
I need people to understand. I was reading excerpts of this interview to my sister last night, and my favorite bits were bits like, I feel that we have fundamentally changed the premise of the Furby.
This is the news that we need. Furby is back.
Furby's back, baby. Meet the Furblets. The headline was also wild. They didn't pull any punches. They were like, here's Chris Cox. He just lost $7 billion or something like that. It was
the gist of it was, hey, y'all aren't doing so hot. Let's ask some questions about this movie production or media production company that you bought for $100 gazillion and sold for $1.250.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. And but then they got to some questions relevant to D&D fans, players especially, such as a question as this. Let's talk about Dungeons and Dragons, a Hasbro game revered by countless geeks. How do you revitalize a decades-old product?
Let's talk about D&D. Let's talk about you and me. How do you revitalize a decades-old product? Well, you want to bring new blood into the player base. The sort of overall popularity of a game will concentrate more and more and more if there's no new player acquisition. You see this with a lot of MMOs like, D&D Online, for example. Neverwinter. D&D's had its fair share of MMOs that dwindle and dwindle as they're, put on life support to sustain an ever smallning player base. We can see rules updates, of course. Generally, when they're done well, you maintain the player base that you had and add new people to it because it's easier to start at issue 1 than it is to start at, Spider-Man issue 30. And you might piss off some old school fans if you revamp your edition too hard, but that's the needle that Wizards is trying to thread right now, so it makes sense. What else might you do? You might try and make a game more appealing to a broader audience through the type of content you publish. I think that they've been doing that in many ways. I think it's not just good ethics, but also good business to practice a certain amount of diversity within your art and within your characters and things like that.
I feel like there's an element to which you look at what are the possible gateways, right? Like if you're trying to expand the player base of this form of play, as Chris Cox keeps saying, our core thing is play, and that's where you meet toys and games. Good for him. So it feels like that might have been an easier conclusion to come to, but all right. But you've got these different avenues of play. Okay, so what are the gateways that might grab people? People who like board games might want to start playing D&D. So maybe we start targeting that. We make some tie-in products that are D&D and board games that can lead people into playing the TTRPG. Because we already do board games. We already have those, avenues of creation and distribution. Maybe we look at the video game sector, see what play people are getting into there, things like World of Warcraft and Baldur's Gate, and see how we can create that avenue, make these pathways easier to lead between backwards and forwards between these different types of products that we make and that we have sort of our fingers in the pie. And I feel like I don't mean to be ragging on Chris Cox, but it's so funny reading his answer because he just sort of says, from where I'm sitting, it looks like his answer is Critical Role exists, ? Profit. And then he says at the end, 40% of our player base is women. Mm-hmm. And there's no follow through on why he said that. What's the so what? What's so what's the action plan? Like he just says 40% of our player base is women. I'm like, neat.
Yeah. And that if I were in the role of answering that question officially, I would say to the guy, it was a guy who was asking the questions, it's already done. It's already revitalized. It's already there. We don't have to. It has been revitalized. There are so many more people playing than ever. There are so many more different kinds of folks playing than ever. It's revitalized. It's done its work there already. Now we just need to shepherd it forward. Mm-hmm. Which leads me to the next question that I want to ask, or was asked. Is the stereotype about D&D players being socially awkward true? And Chris said, I don't claim to be the biggest social butterfly in the world, but over the last 8 years, I probably made more new friends playing D&D than I have since college. And that's not supposed to happen in your 40s. It's a great way to connect with people, and it's very social.
I mean, points to him for saying it's a very social game, because it is. It's such a bizarre... I don't know whether misconception is the right word, but there is such a stereotype of this is an antisocial game. It kind of in a similar way, but but different to video games. Oh, this is an antisocial pastime. But actually, if you're there with your guild on WoW, you are engaging in a social activity. You are playing with other people. But even more than that, if you're playing D&D, it is an inherently social experience. So I'll pay that. I'll pay that for him at least staking that flag. That's not a phrase. That's not a saying.
Staking a claim, planting a flag.
Yeah.
I don't know where this came from. Everyone is awkward socially. I think people have a feeling that there are some huge number of people out there who are like the 80s cool kids, in the high school TV or movies. They're all just like, they just walk in and everyone's like, ooh. No one's like that. There might be like 0.0001% of the world like that. Just walk into like a local diner or a grocery store or anywhere in public. Everybody's awkward. Everybody. James, you were at a event this weekend.
Yes, I was at the Critical Role live show, episode 98 of the Bells Hells campaign at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles. Huge event. They sold out the Greek pretty much. And, I couldn't tell you for sure how many thousand people fill that theater, but damn, it was a lot of people. And there was an enormous, spectrum of people who were very, California put together, social butterfly type, and people who were who were sort of the stereotypical D&D nerd who were there on their own and, weren't really socializing with anyone other than whoever came with them. But for the most part, 9 out of 10 interactions that I had would be someone who I'd never met before. We did not know each other in any way, but we saw something we loved about the other person, whether it was a cosplay / outfit or like a thing that they had brought with them. So we overheard them talking with their friend about something, and just like in a second, conversation was struck up, because the very baseline of human social interaction is commonality or exception. And if you can strike up a conversation with someone and get animated and want to communicate with people rather than being inherently antisocial, which I think very few people are, we may be awkward, but we're not antisocial, then that's the problem of communication. It's about finding commonalities and things that excite you. And boy, I have almost never seen, outside of a gaming con, a bigger crucible of people who are excited about one particularly nerdy thing all in one place before, which is just a hotbed. It's a petri dish of social interaction there.
It's so interesting. You say that, this sort of bedrock is commonality. And it's so true, because you know what? Reading this interview, it feels socially awkward. And I think a lot of that comes down to that lack of commonality. It feels like you've got this guy from a finance magazine who's been told to talk to the Hasbro guy. And he's like, so you make toys, I guess? Question mark? And Chris Cox is coming in looking really, self-conscious and going, yeah, we make toys.
Yeah. And our big problem was we stopped making toys and started trying to make movies.
Oh my gosh. Oh God, sorry. I know it's not what we're talking about, but there's that part where he says, we made a mistake. We tried to break into the film and TV industry for 3 whole years and we got nowhere. So we're just selling. And it's like, 3 years is not very much to try to break into a whole other okay, it's fine.
Yeah. That interview, it's out there at Fortune magazine, so you can read it for yourselves out there in listener land. But it's funny. It's awkward. It's everything that I love about life is right there in that interview. We have time actually to get to some viewer and listener questions.
Viewer questions, listener questions. We're reaching into the bag of listener viewer questions. That's a jingle I just made. I'm just pitching that maybe that could be our jingle.
I'm going to start with a question just because they're asking Ben and Ben's not here. So Lulsworth asks, hi, Ben. Is there an average player Who are they? Is it you? How often do they play? And for how long? Do they own and have they read the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide? Do they just play D&D or do they play other games? How about online versus homebrew? I was actually going to ask this as a beginning question to you. Before I read that the question was here, I was going to phrase it a little differently, but I'm really curious to hear what you, James, and Dael have to say about this question from Lulsworth.
I love this. Is such a good question because they know there's no answer that we can give. It feels like a trap.
Mhm.
It's so good. It really, I mean, but doesn't that just get to the heart of so many things that we talk about here? Is like, players don't want X, players do want Y. And ultimately, it's like, okay, but who are players?
Mhm.
Who is the average D&D player? And I just don't know.
You might be able to find a modal average, but if you're trying to find, the mean average of D&D players, to take every D&D player into a world, blend them up ideologically, and print out the mean average D&D player, no such player
like
exists.
AI would.
The
average
facet.
D&D player is AI.
Mhm.
People keep trying to play D&D with AI being the dungeon master. What if we try to play D&D with AI, but make AI be the player? Huh? Did we ever think about that?
I would like that more than most of my players.
No, Shawn, no. Don't be seduced by the dark side.
Sorry. AI smells so much better than my players. I'm just saying. It's true.
It never tries to steal from random NPCs.
No, I don't have to bail AI out at 3 a.m. on random Saturdays. Just saying.
You can trust that it's rolling randomly and not fudging its dice.
I trust no such things. I don't believe you.
No, you're right. It rolls 10.5 every single time.
Or it's learned from degenerate player behavior and actually fudges every roll because it's learned that that's the optimal solution and will lie.
I got a 20 again?
Well, statistically unlikely. I have, in fact, rolled 4 20s in a row this game. All right, Mr. Data, I don't believe you. What were we talking about? Modal averages?
We're talking about the average player.
Who's the average D&D player? Yeah. All I can say, I've never met him.
Yeah, I have. He's quite boring, to be honest. No, there isn't an average player, but there are, I'm going to go way back into my marketing life here. There are archetypes, right? There are personas that you can group together to make certain assumptions about at least a portion of the player base. So is there an average player? Absolutely not. But you can say there is this type of player, the player who plays 4 hours a week in a home game that is homebrewed by their DM. What is the likelihood that they have bought the Player's Handbook? That you can figure out. What's the likelihood that they have read the Dungeon Master's Guide? That you can actually find the data and figure out. And that's one way. For evil, you can business-wise move things around and find things. But also just for help purposes, what do those players need? What do the players need who only play once a month at the local game store because they can't find a home game? You can say, oh, okay, this is who they are. This is what they need. And then you can take resources and move them in that direction to help them get to the next step or help them achieve some goal of playing more regularly, of running their own game. And those sorts of things you actually can look at. And I'm sure Wizards does with all those surveys they send out. If they're doing those surveys correctly, they are creating those archetypes, those personas, and using that data to hopefully make the game better, both rules-wise and accessibility-wise for everyone.
Well, I think that's the only way you can do it with a game that's trying to do what D&D is trying to do, right? Because there's no wrong way to make a game, only wrong for your intentions, only wrong for your desires, your outcomes. Because D&D is in the unfortunate position of trying to be all things to all people. It needs to create these average players, these archetypes, to kind of, they need to make up a guy and make that guy happy. And so if they do their job in identifying what those sort of archetypes, what traits those archetypes like to compile. See, this is, I think, a pretty good use for AI, actually, right? Can you make an AI that likes these qualities and then start generating perhaps what that wants? And then you can start using that as a baseline to design from. I think that's actually a really good use for AI because it's trying to collate enormous amounts of data. That's something that humans are naturally very bad at. So if you can do that, that's great. If on the other hand, if you're writing for Blades in the Dark or an even more niche indie game than that, you're much better off thinking of a particular type of player and designing for an audience of maybe, 100 individual sickos who like that thing. It's the best art advice I ever gave. Don't try and make art for everyone. Make art for 100 individual sickos. And you will make something very good. Not for everyone, but the people who like it will really, really like it. But that's not what D&D is trying to do. So, yeah, it's all about those archetypes.
I don't know about an average D&D player, but what I do know is that 40% of the player base is women.
You do know that. You do, in fact, know that. Gabriel's question. Gabriel asks, have any of you ever run a chase scene? I know there were rules for it in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but I never saw or hear anyone ever using it. How can you make a chase feel right? Dael, you're flexing a bit.
Well, I'm just eager and ready to put one James Hake in the hot seat real quick. Since one could say that kind of the climactic scene of Waterdeep Dragon Heist is a chase sequence. And it is a fairly unusual sort of chapter of an adventure in a sort of, official D&D module, because it's a series of different scenes that come together in a different order depending on which villain you chose to kind of pursue. And I am curious about your kind of insights on how that came together. And look, am I saying it's the greatest chase scene ever written? We'll come back to that. But I am curious about what you had to say about that.
Dael, I hate to disappoint you, but you'll have to refer to the other James, to MCDM's own James Introcaso, because he wrote that brilliant piece of design. But
in that case, that's the worst one I've ever seen.
Get Introcaso in here.
Get him in here. I know you're in chat. You've been in chat before, James. No, but I am actually, I'm editing a 5e style chase sequence right now. Actually, my friend Brooks wrote one for an upcoming thing. And I've been looking it over. It's a minecart chase, which comes with its own set of slightly different situations because everyone is kind of in the same train car together, right? They're all going at the same speed rather than potentially splitting off and doing individual complications like the D&D wants. And what I found looking at this is that if the party moves as a unit and they need to cover any sort of distance, they want to go about 1,000 feet in this chase sequence. That's one of the conditions for winning. Then even moving at this minecart speed of 90 feet around, that is like 20 rounds of chase sequence with one complication at the end of every single player's turn, which is like 80 rolls on a D20 table, half of which are nothing happens. I have my issues with 5e's chase rules. I think 5e's chase sequences would work a lot better if they went even more abstract. They try to go abstract, but they're still hung up on this tactical movement nonsense that, despite trying to rid themselves of, they can't seem to decouple. You need to have something that's even more just like scene and complication based. Make the complications the beats. and have the chase scene just make it a 3 act structure or like a 5 act structure, right? 5 beats in your chase that come with something new. And that could be an enemy action. It could be a complication. It could be whatever. Maybe even make a D6 table to roll on it, right? The complication is enemies cast a spell or enemy throws a rock or something. If you can just abstract it away even more from 5e combat, because obviously they're trying to do that anyway, you'll have a better chase sequence system than what we got in the DMG.
I've tried my hand at multiple different methods of chase scenes, and I think ultimately what I have learned is that if you really want to keep up the energy, because there is this sort of kinetic energy in a chase scene in a film or whatever. If you want to keep up that energy, it's going to be in your hands as the DM. I think a lot of this is keeping up the description, like knowing what's going to happen. Honestly, forget the freedom of choice. I know it's a TTRPG, but if you want it to feel like a chase scene, you kind of have to, we talk about pools and rivers. No pools. No pools. You're in the whitewater rapids right now, and you're just describing things that are happening, and then every now and then throw an A/B choice at one of your players, right? This is what's happening. They duck down this alleyway. Rogue, do you stay on the ground or do you go up onto the roofs, right? That's the deal. Like, do you try and take this shortcut? Do you go up on the roofs? They make their choice. You describe what happens, right? Don't stop for rolls. I understand why we would want to. I understand why the players might want to. But if you keep up that pace, hopefully your players aren't stopping to think, why aren't I allowed to try and do X, Y, Z? They're just kind of listening to what's happening and then making the choice in that frantic moment that you give to them. Give a choice to each player. Maybe check in a couple of group choices so that it, feels like it's not literally one per player. But, keep it exciting. Keep the ball in your own court so that you can control that exciting flavor, because if you hand it over to your players too much, they will say things like, I'm going to shoot him. And then they will have lots of bonuses to it and they will shoot him. And the only logical thing to happen is that he falls down or it turns into a combat scene. Yeah.
When I was in Australia last for PAX Oz, I stayed with Ben Byrne, and it's a shame he's not here right now because he could back me up on this. We watched The Adventures of Tintin, the animated movie. And I was a little disappointed by that movie. I thought it was a lot better than my memory was better than the movie actually was. But the best part of that movie is this madcap chase scene through a vaguely Middle Eastern city where they start on a moped or a truck or something, and between all of like dams bursting and people shooting rocket launchers, they wind up with just the handlebars of a moped, zip lining down a power line. It's like every couple of seconds, something completely changes the landscape. And you just can't really do that in a scene where everybody is thinking about choice all the time. Yeah, things just have to happen in a kinetic chase sequence.
The question is, why do you want a chase scene? Right? Do you want a chase scene to figure out if someone gets away? Don't do that because it doesn't work in 5e, as James and Dael have both already said. If you want those big, explosive, pivotal, engaging moments, just have those big moments and do it in the form of a chase scene, but don't, there's no chase involved. It's just these things are happening to you.
Shawn, did you wind up using the chase rules that were in Agents of the Empire that Ghostfire published ever?
I did not. I did not. When I was running that adventure, it always made more sense to focus on, spoilers, the blimp. And so that was where the fun was. And so we focused the camera on that and we stayed there.
See, that's so interesting because Michael did just bring up in chat, how did James Bond movies do it? They have at least one in every movie. And Agents of the Empire is the spy adventure, basically, right? It is such a trope of that genre. And I think you can learn a lot by going and watching a bunch of sort of spy movies, fugitive movies, your Jason Bournes, just watching kind of what are the beats that are important to feeling that sort of high octane pace of these sequences and seeing how you can kind of translate that to a spoken word game. Someone else in chat described it as being like a quick time event in a video game.
Mhm.
And I think that's a pretty good fit. But the benefit that you have in a TTRPG is that you don't then have to literally map out every single outcome, because you have the flexibility to kind of morph it. So I think it's very similar to that energy, but kind of with better control.
The thing that I've tried to do in the few that I've done recently is make the chase to get into a position where you can do the thing that you actually want to do. So it's not you start 90 feet away and let's measure it. It's they're in the distance. You need to successfully do these 4 things. Then you can get to a point where we can get into the mechanics and you can use your magic missile from hundreds of feet away or your longbow from 600 feet away and do those cool things that you could only do from range. But you have to get to that point in order to do it first.
Which is why chases are so good in urban environments and so difficult in non-urban environments, because you really want to keep a lot of innocent bystanders between you and the target at all times.
Well, so
until the very end.
a chase scene's core tension, of course, is will the heroes get them? But in a heroic action medium, the real question is not will they, because we know they will. The interest is in how will they. And by that metric, we can say that making interesting choices is the heart of a good chase. Also, sometimes the only interesting choice is also the only obvious solution, right? Like, let's say, take it out of the urban environment, right? Just like Dael told us not to do. Let's say we're running down a mountainside, or, we're riding.
I can't believe you've done this.
Let's say we're going
a sled down a mountainside.
Yeah, we're doing a James Bond like ski chase.
It's like Willow.
You're going down this mountainside, and the bad guy is outside of longbow range, 600 feet away from you, and you're moving at roughly the same pace. You can't just outskill them. You need to outthink them. Well, you could follow directly in their path, but if you're equally skilled, there's no way that will catch them, which means that there's no choice. You have to make a shortcut somehow. Okay, so how do you make the shortcut? The DM will present you with the shortcut. So your only choice is, I'll take the shortcut, and you got to make it happen. Which means, to me, the heart of an RPG chase scene is the DM saying, this is what the shortcut is like. Make one roll, describe how you do it to me. It is a cutscene that one of 2 people gets to describe. It's either the GM describes it, in which case it's the GM describing 8 things in a row, or the players get the opportunity to take the fiction away from the GM and describe how they do a cool thing. That's how you get that kinetic, fast-paced action.
I just had a thought. It's not fully there yet. Bring it in, bring it to the table. Bear with. But I was just thinking about there's always this, the D20 roll plus modifiers really drags down the chase scene for me. What if it's somehow a coin flip instead?
Oh.
Like we just bring it down to, does it work, does it not work? Really, really reinforce that binary. And I feel like there's something that still needs to be massaged in there, because there are things where it's like, okay, but you should get some kind of a benefit or a bonus because you are good at XYZ thing. But I think there's something in that idea of it's down to chance more than it is down to skill, because everything is just happening on top of each other.
Each character who does the things that need to be done, you made all 3 or all 4 of the checks along the way, you get to flip a coin. So if every character gets to make the flip, it's still, if there's 5 characters, you need 1 heads out of 5. That's what, 50, 25, 12, 7 % chance if only one of you makes it, and then you could gauge it that way.
Like a fully simplified skill challenge.
Right. Exactly. Oh, just one little question on chase leads to so much. I love this panel, and I love our listeners. Thank you, Gabrielle, for the question. I think we are at that time where we have to say goodbye, but these questions were great. And I want James and Dael together either alternating or at the same time to tell everyone out there how they can get their question read.
Wait, okay. We're going to do this like the twins from The Shining. You ready?
All right.
Do we start with come play with us? Do we?
Yes.
Come email us at
Okay, that's what we'll do. Okay. Ready? 3,
Yes.
2, 1.
2.
come email
Come
us at
email us at
podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
I forgot the email address.
Dael! I wonder Twin Towers didn't activate.
Oh, Dael froze.
No!
She's back.
I just died.
I believe what they were trying to say is come email us at podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
There's another world where that went perfectly.
Yes, but we are not living in that world. But we are living in a wonderful world. Thank you, everybody in the chat. Thank you, all our listeners. Thank you, James Hake. Thank you, Dael Kingsmill. I've been Shawn Merwin. We are out, and we'll catch you next week. Same time, same channel. Babada?
Babada.
Wait, Ben's not here. We can say as many babadas as we like. Come Oh dear.
When Ben's away, the Lorecats will play.